Hello. Okay. Thanks, Udo, for that talk. I thought it was very interesting. I felt like what you've presented gives us a very good overview of the legal and ethical precedents of medical assistance in dying, and that would propel a lot of conversations forward. To my understanding, there are two reasons why more traditional or conservative societies might resist MAiD, i.e., as you've mentioned, the slippery slope argument. But the second I'm quite interested in, and interested to hear your opinion on, is the prevalence of such, again, traditional and conservative ideas as the doctrine of double effect. So I was wondering how, if you had any thoughts about how MAiD can be brought to greater progression in communities where it's not yet legal.
Yeah, that's thankfully I didn't talk about that. Because I'm really on this boat at the moment. Yeah, these debates we have left way behind us. It's uninteresting. Let other people discuss this. Because now and I get back to your question though. Now I think in countries that have decriminalized or that are decriminalizing, the issues are really fundamentally different. It's really about who should get access, what are the safeguards we put in place, the issue of advanced directives, which is really dicey. I haven't talked about it. I think there are serious ethical issues about it that are not straightforward. Mature minors, and the issue of people that have no decisional capacity, never had it. We don't even know what they would have wanted. Because all these systems at the moment are built on liberal autonomy, choice, informed choice. But what about people who can't make those choices and suffer too? So these are the issues. The doctrine of the double effect, I think it's a nice psychological tool for doctors to feel good about themselves who don't feel good about themselves. I have to be honest, I never got my head around that. I also accept, by the way, that the courts buy into this. And my partner, who's a lawyer, insists, yeah, even this intention-foresight distinction, all of this makes perfect sense. And I maybe philosophers think differently. So I don't know what the answer to this is. My view is, if some of these arguments, like the doctrine of the double effect, if that can be utilized to get more doctors on board, take it and run with it. I would be totally opportunistic. Yeah, that would be my take. But really, I mean, these are empirical questions. I don't know what works best and what doesn't work. I have no idea.
So I think my intuitions are quite different from yours on this issue. So maybe it's worth exploring. We have different takes on the slippery slope. So if I was passing someone on a bridge about to jump, I think most people would agree that it'd be the wrong thing to do to give them a push. It'd be the wrong thing to do to try and talk them into jumping. Most of us would say things like, consider your loved ones, consider that things will get better no matter how bad it is now. It doesn't have to get worse, and so on and so forth. But the law on assisted dying, assisted suicide, makes an exception to that for certain groups or certain categories of people, which straight away to me is kind of a slippery slope. You're saying this group of people are not in that category where we'll try and talk them out of it. We will create a path where they can essentially jump. Of course, there are some really seriously difficult cases, and those are the ones where you start with, they're really like the one you began your talk with. Those are really hard cases, right? So that's where you begin, and that's how you win people to this law. But then inevitably the discussion begins of like, well, where are the boundaries, where are the categories? And that's, I think, where the slippery slope also comes in, because you start with people who are in chronically debilitating, horrible pain, who have very little prospect for any decent quality of life whatsoever, and then gradually you expand that to groups that aren't quite in that category, and before you know it, you're discussing people who've got morbid depression and whether or not they're allowed to have access to this path as well. So it's in that sense, I think it's kind of inherent to the discussion that there's some sort of slippery slope. So my sort of take on this is that the better position is to have a culture of expectation that we will encourage people to live, that life is better than death, that death is absolute, you can't reverse it, you don't come back from it, and that while we understand why somebody might take their own life, I'm not going to say we should criminalize suicide, I don't think the state, society should actively encourage, legalize a process towards death?
Yeah. Okay. So of course we disagree, and that's totally fair enough, right? I think the question really boils down to the Supreme Court judgment, which is fundamentally people should be self-determining, and the problem is that some people will not be able, for instance, to take their own lives, who don't find their lives worth living, and no matter how much you encourage them, they still won't find it worth living. So we should assist them to have a dignified end, as opposed to consider potentially suffer for many years, for decades, as some of these people with these disabilities would have had to endure. And yeah, we just have then really different intuitions about how important suffering and self-determination is. I agree.
Sorry, I'm back to being one. Well, I mean, if it's just, can I just ask you, so there is one thing encouraging people to live, but which I'm all in favour of. But if in the end they say thank you for, you know, that all of that support and what you've offered me, but I've had enough, surely it's their life. And if there is a profession who's willing to ensure that's done properly, what I don't see in a pro-life culture is why you should take away that person's decision. I think you can be as encouraging as you like, but there's a difference between coercion and encouragement.
Well, I don't think there's any coercion. I mean, you're not.
Well, there is coercion if you say it's illegal. That's coercion.
There's lots of things I can't do. I'm not coerced into not being able to do them. I just can't do them. So I don't buy the coercion. You're asking society to assist you to do something that you can't do. That's not coercive if I say no, I'm not assisting you in doing that.
Well, no, but if there's somebody in society who wants to do that, so if Udo wants to start up a service of offering euthanasia and I want to use it, and the state says, no, you can't do that, that's coercion.
Yeah, okay, fair. But I think the concern I have is that you use a very narrow group of people. So people who are in a terrible situation, who can't resolve it themselves, so they can't commit suicide. And that's the group that you use to get access to this broader assisted dying legislation. I do think those really hard cases don't make for good law. We know hard cases make for bad law. It's a common problem. So I worry a little bit about that.
Well, my understanding of Udo's talk was precisely the opposite. He, as far as I understood it, was saying the Supreme Court adopt this very broad view that as long as you're competent and you want to die, it's not that you have to come from this very narrow group, it's actually that you just have to be suffering in a manner that you think is intolerable.
You use that route. That's what, and so if you're talking about people who have the ability to commit suicide themselves, then yeah, I do worry about why are we facilitating that. I did have a close friend who had terrible pain. He came off his bike, he ripped his shoulder out, neuropathic pain, awful, and eventually took his own life. He'll ask me the night before, Stuart, should I kill myself tomorrow? I said, no, don't do it. You've got things to live for, you've got people that love you. I've gone that path. That's the path that I think is correct. I don't blame him for what he did, but I would not have supported him for what he did. And I don't think society should support people in that situation doing that.
Well, so Udo, I think if Singapore came to you, if the government, the Ministry of Health came to you and said, you've had all of this experience with legislation and you've heard a lot of arguments, what advice would you give to them based on your experience?
Well, I mean, that's a rhetorical question, obviously, but fair enough. I have to be honest, unlike your concerns, obviously, because what I like to look at is in jurisdictions that have decriminalized assisted dying. So in society, when you look at opinion surveys of people, are they actually supportive of this, or do they think, oh damn, this is a real threat to me, my well-being, my family members, it's just all too easy, any of this. And the truth is, across jurisdictions, there is not a single country where assisted dying has been made available, where not overwhelming majorities of people are grateful that they have it. And that's all I need to know about this, quite frankly. There's not a single country where there has been a concerted effort to reverse any of this, partly because societal support is like overwhelming. We are looking at 75, 80% support in favor of it. And what I grant you is there are some issues, because here the fundamental issue is that everybody understands it is actually a choice that individuals should be able to make, and not others should make it for other individuals. That is understood, I think, in most liberal democracies. And this is, I think, why I have absolutely no doubt whether it's Singapore or not. When you look across the globe now, you see an increasing number of people having the same debates and coming to the same conclusions, not just in the global north, but also in the global south. And again, it might be regrettable to some, but I think the train is going there and it's not going to stop. And the reason for this is that we want self-determination. That's just how we operate. And this will be true for Singapore too, even if you might have slightly different takes on family involvement, communitarian values, and I do appreciate that there are cultural differences. But when you look at court cases, for instance, in South Africa, which is very much with African Ubuntu, which is very much a communitarian society, they have a Supreme Court case happening now. The same debates are being aired, and you will find African people, not white people in Africa, but African peoples themselves clamoring for the same types of legislation that you can find in the Netherlands or in Canada or in other countries. So yeah, that's why I'm, from my perspective, optimistic that this will not stop, because we want those rights.
Okay, so Udo is a philosopher, so he loves robust opposition. So please give some dissenting views. Thank you for putting that so forcefully. Other views from the audience? Do you think Singapore will ever embrace assisted dying? Yeah. Young people are nodding their heads. Do you think this is a topic for discussion in Singapore, or not for the next decade?
So, thanks for the thought. I mean, I do agree about this thing about slippery slope. So if you're talking about not being too restrictive, a law that's not too restrictive, then why not to anybody who asks for it? Why are you restricting it to people who has mental conditions, or people who has disabilities, or people who I mean, don't even ask for a reason. If I want to die, if I'm tired of living for whatever reason, why do I have to tell you my reason? It's my right to do what I will with my body. So, and if you provide a law that only allows assisted dying for certain groups of people, then I can argue on the fact that you are not being fair to me. Why must I justify my request to die? I mean, and that's happening in Netherlands already. There are people who just said they're tired of living, and they're given the choice. Why even have criteria at all?
You see a much stronger thing when it comes to the facts of the matter. So this is not true for the Netherlands, you see. The people that are described as, being tired of living are usually, as you would expect, elderly people. It's not like a 17-year-old who is tired of living, right? Elderly people with lots of morbidities, a very low quality of life, who may be eligible anyway for an assisted death, but who have also decided that as far as they are concerned, their life has concluded at the age of 86 or 92 or whatever it might be. Again, you might think, I know better than them what is good for them, but they have made those decisions, and again, I'm on this trip like I find that deserves respect as opposed to scorn, because these are difficult decisions, because the truth is, we all love our lives, all right? It's not that we just throw it away frivolously because we have nothing better to do, because we are bored of the program in the cinema. This is not how we end our lives, right? We have serious reasons for that, all of us who consider these choices. Now, to your other question, of course, whether or not there should be an autonomy-only type, right? This case has been made by philosophers. To your horror, presumably, Govan van Hattoch in the Netherlands has written a book that came out a year ago with Routledge, where he makes the autonomy-only case and basically says we should decriminalize it for decisionally capable people. And the only thing we need to look at is whether the decision is informed, whether they understand what alternative course of action they had, whether the condition, whatever the condition is intractable at the time of decision making. Like, there's no easy fix, if you know what I'm saying. I can't just give him $1 million and they will be better, that sort of thing. But then this is something in his view that deserves respect. And again, you might beg to differ, but at least the case has been made, so it is worth at least reading it and thinking why this guy is so terribly wrong. That would be my suggestion.
So do you think that's going to happen, that it's going to come a point where anybody can ask for anything just because I can consent and I understand what the consequences are? And society society is obliged to provide what they ask for if they have the ability to.
I'm very skeptical, and the main reason for this is that the medical profession is involved in it. And as long as the medical profession is involved in it, you need the label of patient as opposed to movie program sucks, missed the train, was dumped by the girlfriend, and so on and so forth. Right? Those sorts of cases where, spur of the moment type things, you need to include that. So you need to have a cooling off period anyway, I think, for all sorts of reasons as a safeguard. But for that reason, I don't think this will happen, because the people that you're concerned about would not be defined as patients. And when you look at the criteria the Supreme Court mentioned, it's very clear that all of these people would still meet the label patient, as opposed to some other person. And this is, now you can argue then again that maybe Canada will then decide something else, but I suspect we probably need another Supreme Court judgment where the judges decide basically that anything goes. I'm very skeptical that this will come about anytime soon.
I guess it's just borrowing on the slippery slope argument, right? That it's going to come, it may come to a point where you don't even need doctors at all, right? Because if I'm competent, somebody tells me I'm competent, I'm judged to be competent, you have an agency in the government that can provide barbiturates for anybody who wants to die as long as they are competent. And it's not criminal. Why do you even need doctors, right? Because like you say, they are not patients, they're just people who do not want to live.
The reason why we involve doctors in this typically, right, is to do with the fact that doctors are a trusted profession. They're super tightly regulated. These are all safeguards. This is why I think, with the exception of Switzerland, in any other country, unless I'm mistaken, but I think there's no other country where doctors are not involved, if you know what I'm saying. Doctors are involved in all those cases. And the reason for this is that society has decided this is a healthcare service. I understand you disagree, but this is a healthcare service. These people must be patients. And we use the healthcare profession as a provider because it is so tightly regulated, and so we don't end up in this anarchy that you describe.
Thanks, Udo. Can I ask you a question about the legal reasoning around the concept of collective vulnerability? I found those comments in the judgment very stark, and it occurred to me that there must be something special about this kind of decision, because I would have thought in Canada more broadly, constructing legal responses or public policy to the protection of group-based membership is quite a common strategy. Let's say anti-discrimination law, something like that. Very common to associate people with membership of groups and then issue safeguards that protect them from being discriminated against, for example. So have they picked out in that section 7 of the Charter, Principle 7 or something says, that around this kind of decision, the idea of group vulnerability is too close to the notions of the person's private life or the kind of bodily integrity matter? Because I was trying to understand how, if they took that line of reasoning seriously, it would threaten, it seems to be, a lot of protective interventions that would seem rightfully part of the law in that country. And certainly in Singapore, we have crime legislation that seeks to protect vulnerable people on the basis of group membership in various kinds of ways. So was the answer on the slide after, where I think what the judgment said was, when it comes to these kinds of matters of bodily integrity, that argument doesn't work? Or is it a dismissing of that argument in its entirety?
Was it this one here?
Yeah, so the next slide, I think, articulated
I know which one.
Full citizenship, but also
totally vulnerable. Here it is. So So the long story short, I cannot answer your legal question, right? What I do know is that in various contexts, people have stepped away from the idea of collective vulnerability. Give an example, the CEOMS, the current version of the research ethics guidelines, there is a whole section there where they explain why they do not talk any longer about vulnerable people, because this collective approach is a mistake. It does injustice to the individuals that we should be concerned about, and instead we need to focus on specific criteria that bother us, but we should not use a labeling of large groups of people. This might well still be necessary for policy purposes, but I was pleased when I saw this here, not just because I disagree with, because I agree with the policy outcome, but also because it's always bothered me to say that somebody who asks for an assisted death is vulnerable, regardless of whether this person is a billionaire or a homeless person, regardless of whether this person has serious mental health issues or has no mental health issues. They're very different conditions, and some of these could well give rise to a particular vulnerability, but then to slap the label vulnerability on every single person who has depression is just offensive to large numbers of people with depression who have decisional capacity, legally and otherwise. We should not operate like that, especially when then the agenda here is to remove their agency. That's the other part. Long story short, I have not answered your question because I don't know what the legal, I can't answer that. What I want to say though is that also in other contexts, people have done away with these kinds of labels. They thought they are unhelpful. And they also, by the way, because we don't use particular criteria that identify what we should be looking for, there's also a danger that we overlook people who are not covered under this label of vulnerable, who deserve protection. These are the concerns of people in the research ethics community. Whether this is applicable here, I can't answer that. I apologize.
All right, I think it's 6 o'clock. We shouldn't keep Udo from his all he can eat. Please join me. And
thank you for coming. It's appreciated. Thanks for commenting. Thank you.